a pizza delivery guy is a lot harder than everyone thinks. You have to get to things fast. People are waiting anxiously for their food, and you have to drive carefully so you don't ruin the food. But what happens when the pizza delivery guy's worries get a lot more sinister? In these 3 stories, we'll meet 3 pizza delivery guys. One of them will be stalked by a man who hides another part of himself in the shadows. Another of them is invited to a dinner he can't refuse. And the last one has much more to deliver than just a pizza. Remember to like the stories and subscribe to the channel while you can, because these stories are about to begin. Story 1. Hey guys, I'm Robert, and I have a story to tell you. A story of a simple pizza order that turned into the worst week of my life. A week where I felt like I wasn't alone for a minute, and that last night, I confirmed that I was right. It all started with a simple order for a regular pizza. The directions on the order were clear. An address on the outskirts of the city, a fairly safe neighborhood. Although it was an area I didn't frequent, I needed the extra money, so I headed there. The place was remote, with deserted streets and houses far apart. The address brought my car to a house at the end of the street. There were no lights on, just the dark silhouette of the house. It no longer looked as safe as I thought it would. I looked at the address again, making sure I was in the right place. Once I rang the doorbell. The door creaked open to reveal a tall, thin man with sunken eyes and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His face was hidden in the gloom, and I could not discern precise details. Without a word, he extended a bony arm and handed me the cash, just the right amount. With a gesture, he indicated that I should leave the pizza on the front table. I couldn't help but notice the horrible smell of the house. There was a musty air coming out that made me recoil slightly. As I thanked him, his eyes met mine, and a shiver ran down my spine. His face was hideous. His eyes denoted a tremendous hatred for me. For a moment I thought he knew me before, that at some point I had done something terrible to him. But I was sure I didn't know him. After exchanging glances, he simply closed the door without another word. As I walked back to my car, an uneasy feeling grew inside me, but I decided to ignore it and walk away from that place. As I reached my car, I saw the light of the house flickering in the darkness. I ignored the feeling and got into the car. Just as I was about to start, a figure appeared at the window. The same man stared at me. My hands were shaking as I started the vehicle. I asked him if he needed anything, but he just ignored me and kept looking at me. Uncomfortable, not knowing how to react to such a strange situation, I escaped from there as quickly as possible. How had I gotten to my car so quickly? I was sure that once he had given me the money, the man had stayed in the house. With my heart pounding, I left the sinister house behind and went back to work. I placed a few orders during the night, but on one of them, when I returned to the pizzeria, I found a blank envelope waiting for me on the counter. I reached over to open it curiously, and once I did, I found a note written in uneven, crooked letters. End of the road, Richard. I admit that I was still a bit suggestible from what had happened to me earlier, but I didn't think it was really him who wrote me the note. I thought it was all a practical joke from my coworkers, since they used to make jokes like that. Although this time, none of them took charge. The rest of the days were quite paranoid. Even though I didn't receive any more notes, I felt that something was wrong. Have you ever felt a strange sensation in the back of your neck? Like a shivering that tells you that someone is watching you. Every day, at almost every moment, I felt like this. I know that until now it could be a big paranoia of mine that got out of control, but for some reason, I couldn't stop thinking about that letter and that man. One day, while delivering a pizza to a familiar address, I realized I was on the same street as the sinister house. The memories came flooding back, and anxiety took over. As soon as I got out of the car, I didn't lock the door because I knew I might have to escape. The neighborhood was not unsafe, and there was no one around, so I could take the liberty to do so. My fingers trembled as I rang the doorbell, and to my horror, The door opened to reveal the figure of the man again. This time, his eyes looked more cruel than the previous time. Without saying a word, he handed me a white envelope, in which some money was visible, and told me to leave the pizza on the table at the entrance. His penetrating gaze followed my every move. I got out of there as fast as I could. And as I looked through the envelope, not only did I find the money, but I also found another note. Today is the end, Richard. I swear that what I felt at that moment was inexplicable. A sense of panic, urgency, terror. After seeing the envelope, I looked in the direction of his house, and there he was, staring at me with the same hateful face he had looked at me with before. Without saying anything to him, I got into the car in desperation and tried to start it. But something was wrong. The car wouldn't start. Suddenly, I saw in the rearview mirror a shadow coming from the back seat. Quickly, I opened the car door and jumped out as I saw the person in my car. My eyes widened, and I couldn't help but gasp. It was the man of the house. He was inside my car. He had a bag in his hand. Did he try to choke me with it? But how could he be there? He had just welcomed me into his house. As I looked back into the house, I could see him again, walking slowly towards my position with a knife in his hand. At the same time, the man inside my car still had the bag in his hand, and with some effort due to his great height, he was getting out of my car to try to drown me again. At that moment, I understood everything. They were twins. I summoned all my energy to forget my fear and stand up. I ran as far as I could. And in the distance, I turned and looked in the direction of my car. The twins, dressed in exactly the same way, were looking at me from a distance. Soon after, I called the police, and with them escorting me, I got my car back. Once they entered the two men's house, it was abandoned. The house was completely empty except for 2 boxes. Those 2 boxes were from the pizza I had left for them that night, and the pizza I had left the first night. Both pizzas were intact. Neither had been opened. That was the last time I heard from either of these 2 psychopaths, or received any letters again. I must admit that I quit my job shortly thereafter, as they both knew I worked there. I still think about how things went down that night. You know, it's a miracle I'm here telling this story. The only thing that saved me that night was that the corner of my eye happened to wander into the mirror. If it hadn't, I probably wouldn't have reacted in time. And who knows what would have happened to me if those 2 men had caught me. Story 2. You know, I used to be one of those people who thought the streets weren't dangerous. I mean, I always thought that insecurity was something they only showed on TV, and that in reality, no one is really in danger as long as they don't do anything risky. Today, I still regret how innocent I was. Sometimes there are things that change the way you look at life, things that turn everything you believe in upside down and make you start from scratch. In my case, it all happened one night. One night, a person made me rethink everything I think, to the point of being terrified of the night. It all started at my old job. I used to be a pizza delivery guy at night. It didn't make good money, but it supplemented my morning job. That day I had to make a few deliveries because since it was Saturday, we were working a lot. In between my deliveries, I had to go to an apartment. Once I rang the doorbell. The door rang, inviting me into the apartment. I'm not going to lie. Normally I don't go into apartments and wait for the customer to come down. But I was in a hurry. I just wanted to give him the pizza and leave. Once I knocked on the door to the right room. The door opened and a shy but neurotic man opened the door for me. His house was horrendous. It was full of cockroaches and dirt everywhere. I handed him the pizza and let him pay me. But in a terrifyingly thin voice, the man spoke to me and caught me totally off guard. Hey, would you like to stay and eat with me? After telling him I couldn't, I just turned around, ready to walk to the exit. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand grab my shoulder. It was the man who was holding me so I couldn't leave. Please, stay. I don't want to eat alone. I tried to free myself from his hand, but his fingers were like sharp claws. I understood that I was in a compromising situation, so in a firm voice, I told him that I had other orders and that I should keep working. He looked disappointed, but finally let go of my shoulder. Wary, I walked quickly to my bike. This person was totally insane. I admit I may have been a bit harsh with him, but I preferred to get that problem out of the way. While I was absorbed in my thoughts, I heard someone running quickly towards me. By the time I could react and turn around, it was too late. All I remember is seeing the man I had delivered the pizza to next to me, putting a strange-smelling handkerchief to my nose. After that, everything went blurry, and with no energy in my legs, I fell to the ground. That strange smell, the one that the man had put on the handkerchief, that was chloroform. Confused and not knowing where I was, I opened my eyes after a long nap that could have lasted minutes or hours. As I looked around me, I began to remember everything that had happened and tried to scream, but I couldn't because I had a sock in my mouth. Even though I had seen it for a few seconds, I recognized the place. This was the apartment of the psychopath. I had delivered the pizza earlier, only this time it was inside his house and not outside. Next to the door, I saw him again. He was sitting there, with his same psycho face, staring at me with a huge grin. Desperate, I moved around violently, trying to get out of his grip, but there was no way. The man had tied me so tightly that there was no way I could escape unless someone untied me. Seeing how helpless and terrified I was, the man approached me with the pizza box in his hand. After standing very close to me, he told me that he thought it was very rude that I had declined his invitation, but that it was okay, since we were going to eat together anyway. Once he told me this, my skin crawled, and I began to cry inconsolably. I knew it wouldn't help me at all, but it was the only way to unload all the sadness and despair I was suffering at that moment. Ignoring me, he approached me, and after opening the box, revealed a rotten pizza full of cockroaches. This was not the pizza I had delivered. Noticing my confusion, he spoke to me again, and what he said next made me realize what I was dealing with. He told me that he was going to save the pizza I gave him today to eat in a few weeks. In the meantime, we were going to eat an old pizza that had been sitting in that box for weeks. I looked around and noticed something else. The house was full of pizza boxes, which may or may not have been empty. Trying to think of my chances of escape, my stomach turned as I watched the man eat that rotten pizza. I wanted to vomit, but the little liquid I managed to expel from my mouth was trapped in the sock in my mouth, forcing me to swallow it again. Meanwhile, he was still enjoying the disgusting rotten pizza. When he finished taking the first few bites, the nightmare continued. The psychopath began to mention to me how lonely he felt eating alone and how glad he was to have company at mealtime. In an act that in his head he considered altruistic, he grabbed a piece of rotten pizza and passed it over my face, trying to shove pieces of mozzarella in with his finger, which was forcing the sock into the side of my mouth. My only reaction to this was to cry and cry, trying my hardest not to vomit and choke. Suddenly, in a moment of salvation, I heard something. Someone was banging on the door. The psychopath noticed this too, and slowly approached to see what was going on. Once he did, I could see for a few seconds that there was a lady behind the door, and she looked furious. Once the psychopath approached her, the lady asked him several questions about why there was so much noise, or if something had happened. The psychopath said nothing, and the situation quickly escalated. They both raised their voices, and in an act of impulsivity, the lady peeked into the apartment and saw me. Her reaction was obvious. She began to scream in desperation as she ran to her room. After removing the restraints and opening the front door, the psychopath ran in the direction of the lady. Since I was tied up, I couldn't see anything, but what I was hearing was enough. First I heard the psychopath's footsteps running towards the lady, and once he caught up with her, he used his hands to slam her head against the floor. The lady's screams became more and more muffled, but by the fourth or fifth blow, Nothing could be heard anymore. After a few seconds of silence, the footsteps were heard again, and they returned to the room. Everything seemed to be going on until something changed everything. Before he could lock himself in, some neighbors entered the psychopath's house and began to beat him. When they saw me, they automatically released me, but instead of attacking him and the neighbors, I called 911. Shortly after, the police arrived and took this psychopath away. The neighbors told me that they came out of their houses because of the screams of the lady. During that same night, more than 10 bodies were found in the basement of the building. This man had been killing with impunity for months. After the police interviewed him, he kept saying that he was innocent, as he only invited people to join him for a meal. The man was locked up in a psychiatric hospital, and I find it hard to believe that he will ever be released. So far, they have never found his family or anyone to come and take care of him, and his case is only going downhill. As for me, that was the last time I ever worked delivering pizzas, or with any job that involves interacting with people. I feel like something in me was broken that day, just thinking about what that psycho would have done to me if the lady hadn't interceded. It just turns my stomach. Story 3. Hey, my name is Jen. Like most of you, I love pizza. There's nothing better to eat on a Saturday than a huge pizza, right? Well, now I'll tell you something we certainly do not have in common. I never order pizza delivery. I always go to pick it up, because since that rainy day, I don't want anything to do with pizza delivery guys. That day, it was a normal day. Don't confuse me. I was looking forward to Saturday. Those days I stayed at home watching horror movies and started pizza. But then again, that's what I did every Saturday. I have a lot of friends, but after a week of studying and working, I usually want to relax. That rainy day I did the same thing I always do. I ordered pizza and prepared a horror movie. I was waiting for the pizza to arrive, but to my surprise, a few minutes after I ordered it, the delivery guy was already at my door. When I went to open the door, I had a very bad feeling. There was something wrong with the pizza delivery guys. His eyes were focused on me. He was staring at me in a very nervous way. The man was breathing very heavily and wasn't even looking to protect himself from the rain. He was just standing under it, staring at me. Before I opened the door, I asked the man to wait for a moment, as I had forgotten my keys. He didn't answer me. He just stared at me in a frightening way, smiling a big smile. Once I entered my house, I quickly called the pizzeria and asked him if my order had gone out, if this was one of his delivery men. I was shocked by their response. The girl at the pizzeria said no. She told me that they are running late because of the rain, and they didn't even start making it. Before I could answer her, the phone call was cut off along with the power. I was totally in the dark. I looked out quickly to see if the man was still in the rain waiting for me, but no, there was no one outside. I went to look for my cell phone, but it was totally out of charge. I always had this terrible habit of letting the battery run out and just charging it at that moment. But this time, I would really pay the consequences of that. I went to the kitchen and looked for a knife to defend myself. Was I being paranoid? Was it all just a huge coincidence? No, it couldn't be. That man tried to deliver a pizza that wasn't meant for me. He knew I had ordered it. But still, it could be a joke. Surely the light would be back soon. As if to answer my question, I heard glass breaking and ran into the dining room. The window was open. Someone had smashed it with a rock and used his hand to open it. In the darkness, I could see parts of my dining room wet. Someone came in from outside. I was not alone. I thought about going outside and running out into the rain. But what if it was a trap? What if that scary person was waiting for me outside? I began to ask myself what I should do, and I paid for that doubt dearly. A man came out of the darkness and started choking me from behind. Why was he doing this to me? I had no problems with anyone. I had never made any enemies, nor was I conspicuous enough to be attacked. I struggled to free myself, and managed to push the man away, who only took a step back with a big smile on his face. At that moment, I realized that the man wasn't squeezing too hard. I don't think I got free on my own. He let me go. I ran desperately towards the broken window, but before I got there, I fell backward. The man behind me was not the only pizza delivery man. There were about 5 more coming through my window. The men grabbed me and dragged me to the center of the dining room. The light illuminated them enough that they could see me perfectly. I was surrounded. I had no way out of this. Synchronistically, everyone opened their pizza boxes and pulled out markers from inside. As if they had done it before, they began to draw symbols on my body in a perfectly synchronized manner. My body started to burn a lot, not because their strange ritual was working, but because they were passing the markers with such force and violence that it felt like it was burning my whole body. The pain became more and more intense, until from one second to the next, I stopped feeling it. I began to lose consciousness and fade away at the mercy of these terrifying men, knowing that I might never wake up again. But to my surprise, I did. When I opened my eyes, there was a pizza delivery man in front of me, but he wasn't evil. He was Wally. The pizza delivery guy I had originally ordered was standing in front of me, soaking wet, and calling the police. Once the police arrived, there was no sign of the men. Although I had no ring door camera, many neighbors filmed these people, but the police could never find them. From that day on, I never felt alone again. I feel watched at all times, and sometimes I know I am. Sometimes I see people spying on me in the street. They don't even try to hide that they see me. They just do it. Unfortunately, this is not the worst of my worries. Since that day, I feel that something else is stalking me. A presence that appears in my house when I am in the dark. Something that takes more and more shape and is getting closer and closer to catching me. I try not to think about it, to always be with people and never be in the dark. But every time someone wants to order pizza, I remember that horrible rainy night, and I tell them no. We can order pizza, but I'll be the one to go get it. Thanks for watching. If you like the stories, remember to subscribe and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any other true disturbing stories. See you next video.